Chapter 6 is over putting together work schedule for your employees and for yourself. When we look at putting together a schedule, it's something that it's extremely important. It's not a guessing game, because if we treat it as a guessing game, you end up over or under scheduling your staff for different times, which will affect the quality of service when it comes to those times. So it's a exercise where if we have the data, we use the previous data to anticipate the number of staff that we're going to need with certain days and certain times. However, it's not foolproof. There are many things that we have to take into consideration, besides just the history of what we've served at that time frame, to know what we need to schedule and what other external situations are going on that might affect positively or negatively potential customers for that day. When we look at it, though, there's six basic steps as far as putting together a schedule. The first thing before we can even work on schedule is we got to determine what our budgeted labor cost is. How much money do we get to spend or have to spend when it comes to that certain shift, to make sure that we're not going over what's being budgeted for the week, for the month, for the year. From there, we create a master schedule, which we'll talk about in a bit. After a master schedule is created, we then develop the crew schedules. It's then distributed to the crew and adjusted as need be, depending on what requests and stuff come in. Of course, when the actual event goes on, the after shifts, you're monitoring the employees during shifts, making any adjustments as needed. And then, of course, at the very end, you're analyzing the labor information after shift to make sure that you're matching up with what your budgeted information is. So the first thing is we got to determine our budgeted labor cost. So how much do we get to spend each shift? Well, typically that is based upon whatever is approved in the budget. Typically, it's a percentage of gross sales for the month. So if you're using just the basic standard, it's usually like 33% food cost, 33% labor cost, 30% overhead, and then 3 to 4% profit. So based upon a 33% labor cost, you can guesstimate what your income is going to be for the month, do some math. That gives you a base point for how you determine how much you're going to be able to spend for that month, and then break it down per shifts. So for example here, so the approved monthly budget for June is $38,900. Okay. So if that's how much you get to spend for labor for that month, what you do is you take that labor budget, 38,900, and divide it by the number of days that you're open. And that gives you an average daily wage. So using June as the example, there's 30 days in June, assuming that you're open 7 days a week. $38,900 divided by 30 is $12,096. And that's rounded down. In some cases you would round up. When it comes to labor costs and costs like this, I would round down, because if you round up, then you're spending a little bit more. It's better to round down slightly. So now we know that 12,096 is our average daily wage. Now we look at what our average hourly rate is. And to find the average hourly, you take that number you just got, the average daily wage, and divide it by the average hourly rate. So the average average hourly rate, it's kind of a base model is take what you are paying all of your employees, find the average amount. So if somebody's getting paid $11 an hour, somebody's paying 13, somebody's at 12.50, take all of those, divide it by the number of employees, and that gives you this average hourly rate. By doing that and dividing it by that daily wage, that gives you approximately how many hours you have to be able to assign people to for that day. So in this example, the 1296 was that average daily wage. And then from there, we determined through other math that it was $12 is the average hourly rate. Divide 1296 divided by 12. That gives you the average hours per day. So in this case, it's 108 hours that we have to be able to distribute among the staff for today based on that. Then from there, you can find the weekly average hour. So if we know that there are 108 hours that we get on average per day, and we are open 7 days a week, that means we have a total of 756 hours to be able to allocate for that week, approximately. I mean, it's just a starting point for you to work with, but it gives you a baseline for you to play around with. Because you have to understand 108 hours per day, that's assuming every day was the same number of people. We know like Mondays and Tuesdays are going to be slower days. So we're probably not going to need that 108 hours. But we know Fridays and Saturdays are going to be busier days. So we're going to need probably maybe more than that 108 hours. So it's making sure that we're trying to average things out. So in the end, when you do the schedule for the week, you're hopefully not going over, in this example, the 756 total hours that you are allocating. And, if it is, how can you make adjustments, or you need to be able to justify where that is based upon those sales that are going. And again, just like I said earlier, at the bottom of the slide here, it says, remember these numbers are coming from averages. It's not all going to be split equally. And then schedules can be adjusted as needed, depending on what the needs are for that week. The other thing to take in consideration is what's going on that week as well. Just because you have that 756 hours for the week, pardon me, doesn't mean that you need them all, or it doesn't, or might need more because of circumstances. Like again, Father's Day, in June, so you can find that maybe Sundays are going to be busier on Father's Day than on a typical Sunday. But if you're going to be busier on Father's Day because it's not a typical Sunday, that means you're also going to have more income coming in, which means that that percentage will still hopefully make sense, even though you have to put more staff on than you normally would for that Sunday. So, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts that come with labor cost. It's one of the tougher ones, especially when you're first starting off with putting together schedules, because you want to make sure you're trying to hit those numbers, because you want to make sure you are at or below the percentage that is being put out for you as far as for your labor costs is concerned. If not, you've got to be able to justify the higher number of hours, and it either because you got more income coming in, so that keeps you at the same percentage, or there's going to have to be a good reason as to why you're going higher than the percentage is supposed to be allowing. So you've done the math to start with. Now you've got to create what's called a master schedule. And so a schedule that looks at anticipated customers, and it spreads out the hours between different positions. So it shows the number of positions and how those hours are filled, but a master schedule does not put specific names in place. It says, okay, here's what our needs are for each day of the week. And then here's the number of people that we need for each of them. It doesn't say that, hey, we need to have Joe in this one and Sally in this spot. That comes at the next step. This first one is just looking at what our needs are in general. And then from there, we can then start putting people's names in. Now, obviously, a master schedule needs to be created for each day, because each day is going to be different. Like I said earlier, a schedule for Tuesday is not necessarily going to be the same as a schedule for Saturday. Okay? And so it's pulling all of those into place. Then from there, you create the crew schedule. So here's an example of a master schedule from the book. So you can see here are the number of customers that are expected at the top, 160. Then this one, of course, is for everybody. But as a chef, you might not need to worry about front of the house. You might just have back of the house that you have to and schedule and stuff. And so you can see it looks like they're just open for dinner, right? But you do need people coming in early enough to prep for it. So you can see it starts at 1 p.m., even though they probably don't open until 4 or 5, would be my guess based upon the schedule here. But you see, you have Cook A that's coming in at 1 and staying until 8. Cook B, it starts at 2 and comes in until 9. Cook C and D come in at 4 and they stay until 11, which is probably the closing time, at least for the kitchen, right? And then you can see the same basic setup across the board, whether it's the servers, who's coming in to do the prep work, who's staying to close. You have the host for that day, bus people, dishwashers, bartenders, all coming in, and you've got this just basic schedule. It shows you the total hours that each position works, what their average hourly rate is, and then the total wage cost. And then what you can do with this, especially doing this in a spreadsheet, is then you can calculate, here's the total number of hours for that day, and here's the total average wage cost that you will probably be spending based upon what is needed for that day. Okay, so I said this one is just a basic format. Nobody's names are put in yet. It's just here's what we need in order to be able to serve the customers for that evening. So how do we, get that information? As I said, previous history and stuff is always a good thing. And so any type of sales history and then sales forecasts and trends are things that you will need to be looking at. So sales history, using previous sales to estimate pattern of business for future business. And, a point of sale system is one of your best friends because it's that computer has all that information typically, if you're using it correctly, for you to be able to pull what you've sold, how many customers, and things like that. I remember when I was at Lindsay's, one of the things that we would always do with our reservation book is we would make sure that not only did it have the date, but it also had the day of the week. We also put in little things like if the weather was like if it was storming or if it was an abnormally hot day or anything that might be different. And also if there was anything going on, like if there was a festival going on or something like that, because we wanted to make sure we were taking into account later if we were using that to track our historical reservations, we could see was there anything special going on at that time that would maybe be why we were busier than normal or why we were slower than normal. So from there, you create forecasts for your sales and projections. So you would look at things that can affect your customer history, holidays, seasonal adjustments. Like right now, costs, food costs, of course, COVID, was a big one as far as making adjustments to stuff. What the economy is like, community activities, things along those lines. And then from there, you can start seeing hopefully trends, which allows us to make those sales projections. So any trends locally, especially make a difference as far as we see an uptick in people eating out. Again, right now in June of 2021, we see that a lot because people are going out more. We see people doing more since they're able to be out and about more than they used to be. And there's note of it when it comes to the restaurants and stuff. So exhibit 6.3 here just gives you an example of different sales projections for the year. And so, they're projecting like January is going to be down 10% from last year, February down 15%, and they're giving reasons. So you can see in January, it says down 10%. They're predicting that 8% of that is because there's going to be street construction, probably around where that restaurant's at. And then also 2% due to a tourism drop. February down 15, looks like mostly again that construction and the tourism drop. Same thing for March and April. But then in May, it's down less because it should be done as far as construction. So, it won't be as busy as May of last year, but, it still has that tourism drop. You can see in June, they're predicting up by 5%. And they know that because there's going to be a major promotion that you're going to run as a restaurant to celebrate the end of the construction. And because of that, you're predicting that you're going to see an increase in sales. So, you see, as an example, breaking it down and saying, hey, these are what we're anticipating. Again, it's a projection. It's an educated guess at best, which means it's definitely not set in stone and things can change depending on what happens. If the construction, because there's a bunch of rain, gets pushed back, then yeah, June is not going to be that time to do the promotion because it's probably going into June instead of being done. So, these are ways for you to at least start to anticipate what your needs are going to be for the week, for the month, and even for the year. And it's a good tool for you to use as a manager to help you with that scheduling and putting that labor cost together and trying to get it to where it needs to be, or even a little bit less if possible. So another thing that we need to look at is our customer service needs. So we need to determine when is our busiest and when are we going to need the most amount of service staff available. Again, using historical numbers, you can take some basic information and some assumptions like you're going to be slower in the first part of the day and the last part of the day. You can actually see, okay, how do we go about um, putting together and determining how much staff we're going to need. Another thing you can think about, and it says here in the thing, is there opportunities for cross training, more bang for the buck, and possibly save more hours? I'll give you a big one for the cross training. I used to have, when I was at the Ivy Club, a dishwasher that wanted to come in at like 4 o'clock, and start with dishes. Thing is we didn't open until 5 for dinner. And at 4 o'clock, there were hardly any dishes. We had a little bit of stuff from prep in between, but there wasn't a ton of stuff. But he wanted his hours. And so the solution was, okay, you can come in at 4, but what we're going to do is we're going to cross train you as a prep cook. So from 4 to 5:30, you're not going to come in and really wash dishes the whole time. You maybe run a few dishes, but you're going to peel potatoes and cut carrots and get basic prep ready, last minute prep ready that we need. So we're ready to go to open up for service or to prep for the next day. So then that cuts down. So, it was trying to be creative, saying, I'm not going to bring the dishwasher in to twiddle their thumbs for an hour and a half and not do much of anything and get paid for it. I want to make sure I get the most bang for the buck. And so that cross training came into play and allowed that dishwasher who, if he or she wanted more hours and get more money, okay, we can do that, but here's what we need to do. So those are some different opportunities as well. So you see in exhibit 6.4, to do a customer service needs here. If you're expecting 160, what you can do, again, looking at historical data, you can look at, okay, over the last couple years, the first hour we served about 15% of our customers, 20% of our customers between 6 and 7, almost a quarter of them were between 7 and 8, 30% of them were between 8 and 9, and then we dropped down to 10% that last hour between 9 and 10. And so if you can look at historical data and you work out percentages of how many customers you serve during those times, you can then anticipate approximately how many customers you might be serving at different times. Again, it's not an exact science, but it gives you an idea that obviously between 7 and 9, those are going to be your busiest couple hours based upon historical data, which means you need to be at full force when it comes to your staff so you can take care of that demand, where between 5 and 7, it's not as busy. And then, of course, that last hour, you can cut way back down just for the last couple, as far as front of the house is concerned and stuff like that, to make sure that you are doing the service that's needed. So again, it just gives you an idea of when to expect the hit, about how many would you be expecting at that time, just to make sure that you have your ducks in a row for front and back of the house to make sure you can handle that anticipated rush when it comes in. So now that you've got the master schedule together, you've done all your forecasts and trends and all that, now you're going to put that crew schedule together. Now, the schedule itself, it's not just randomly placing names in different positions. All right. There are two things that you need to take into consideration. First off, is the needs of the business. And then, as far as communication with your employees, what are the needs of the employees? Okay. Um, Make sure you're in communicating with the employees as far as potential increases or decreases in sales, because then they can utilize that information when making requests off. It's not going to solve all scheduling issues, but it can help with it. If you anticipate it to be a busy weekend because it's Father's Day weekend, I mean, you would think that people would know that, but you still want to make sure you communicate with it with people. If you anticipate a slow week because of Heart of Illinois Fair or something like that, that's something you want to anticipate and talk to your staff about, so they understand that, hey, this week might be a slower week. The schedules might be looking a little bit different. If they're looking to take some time off, maybe the slower week is ones where they might want to take those into consideration instead. Okay. Make sure that you have established and communicate time off policies. That should be part of standard operating procedures. It should be written down so everybody knows what it is. And again, you need to make sure you apply it fairly. So things such as vacation requests. Again, there should be a policy in your handbook on what the procedure is to request vacation time. That also should include what's called blocked off time. And those are times where you will not accept vacation time requests. The big holidays, Mother's Day, if you're open on Thanksgiving, New Year's, things along those lines where it's going to be busy, it's all hands on deck. It's something that you want to make sure it's in writing in the policy book. So when they first become a crew member and they first get hired on, and they're, of course, reading through the employee manual, like we know all employees do diligently, that it has it in there in black and white, that, we will not be able to honor time off for these holidays or these dates. Okay. Just so they know. Of course, for vacation time, those should typically be submitted in writing and well in advance as possible. If it's vacation time, they usually know far enough in advance, this is when we want to take vacation. So you should know at least a couple weeks in advance, if not even earlier. So how about day off requests? Somebody that needs a day off. Okay. Again, just like vacation requests, the policy should be in the handbook. Typically, 1 week notice for days off is kind of the norm, although other situations do occur. But it's something that, again, you want to make sure it's spelled out in writing and make sure you are following it as far as being fair and applying the policy from the handbook. So again, what's policy? How is it handled if more than one person is requesting the same day off? Is it based upon seniority or is it based upon first come, first serve? I can't tell you because it depends on what your policy is. Those are things that you or even those above you have to establish as far as those policies are concerned, because you will run across it. You will run across where two line cooks request the same day off. And, you can only give one of them the day off because of scheduling and such. So who gets the day off? Well, you got to refer back to what the company policy is. If there's no company policy for it, ooh, that's a tough one. Again, that's why I go back to, and again, you've heard me say it ad nauseum, these weeks that we've been in class, document, document, document. It needs to be, no, let me rephrase that. It has to be written down, because that's going to save you a lot of headache, because what you do is you then follow what the policy is of that company. Okay. Already talked a little bit, but block off days for major events and holidays. The other side for it is a holiday shift schedule. Maybe that there's a way that, yes, you're working the holiday, but you have a couple different shifts, so people can request the lunch shift or the dinner shift, or what have you. Note also employees that are asking for time off for religious holidays. Those are things that you need to make sure you're taking in consideration as well. So there's, different things that you need to be taking consideration. Again, I fall back to your company needs to make sure it has a written policy on all this stuff, because you as the manager should be able to refer back to the policy and then be able to apply that policy across the board. Now, if you are thinking that you want to become an owner and you want to own your own place, guess what? You need to make sure that these policies are written, whether you're doing them, whether you hire somebody to do HR for you to do that, whether you hire an outside company, that a third party that takes care of those things for you, but you still are ultimately responsible for making sure that these policies and stuff are in place. And then, of course, that your management are taking these policies and actually applying them fairly across the board. Other things that you need to take in consideration, FMLA, Family and Medical Leave Act. So the FMLA applies to businesses of 50 people or more. And what it is that an employee gets 12 weeks of unpaid leave during a 12-month period for birth of a child and care of a newborn, placement of a child for adoption, care for spouse, child, or parent with a serious health condition, an employee that employee that has a serious health condition, and qualifying extensions of spouse's child or parent on covered active duty. So if a spouse, child, or parent is on active duty with the military, then you do have FMLA applies to that as well. If FMLA is in force, please note that when they do return to work, they must be given the same position and same rate of pay that they had when they left. That is a legal issue if you do not, and you can be sued for that. So you want to make sure that if people are taking time off for FMLA, that you are abiding by the letter of the law when it comes to that act as well. Okay. How about an absence policy? Again, just like before, you need an absence policy. It should be in your handbook. What is acceptable? How do they contact? Do they need a doctor release if they're calling in sick? What is the written policy for if somebody calls in sick, if there's an absence? Okay. Some other things you have to take consideration is effective scheduling. You have to understand that just because you have, let's say, 5 cooks, doesn't mean all 5 cooks have the same abilities. So you might need to find that you are placing lower skilled employees with higher skilled employees to help with monitoring and help be a coach and helping them out. On slower days, those Monday, Tuesdays, or what have you, don't forget about potential training sessions, to help with that skill building, to help with those that maybe are not as highly skilled to increase their skill sets through different training and stuff done in-house. Okay. Another interesting part, of course, about this industry is that flexibility, because we need to make sure we're trying to meet those requests of our employees. We need to get training in. We need to make sure we're taking care of meetings and stuff that our employees are involved with. So means you need to be creative and flexible on how employees are scheduled sometimes. So it's not all set in stone. It's something that you have to understand that things might come up, things change, and you need to have that flexibility. Of course, as a manager, I remember saying that to my staff, but then also telling them that, hey, it is a two-way street. I understand that I need to be flexible with you, but I'm asking you to be flexible with me as well when it comes to those things. Again, it's about how you approach things with your employees that can make a huge difference. Another thing you need to take in consideration is if you are hiring minors. The FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act, sets rules for minimum wage, overtime pay, equal pay, record keeping, and child labor standards. So, for example, if you hire somebody in the kitchen who is under 18, they are not allowed to operate power equipment. You go, okay, like they can't operate a jackhammer. Well, yeah, that's power equipment, but not something we use in the kitchen. But a slicer, a mechanical slicer that we would use to slice beef or cheeses and stuff, those mechanical slicers are considered power equipment. So somebody that's under 18 cannot operate that piece of machinery legally because due to the Fair Labor Standards Act. All right. If you're scheduling minors, you do need to know the laws when scheduling them because not only is it what they can't do as far as operate equipment, but also their restrictions when it comes to work, the time they can start, the hours they can have, especially when they're in school, things along those lines. For those of you that remember under 18 and having a tough time getting a job, sometimes it's because of the restrictions, but it's because it's there to protect you so you're not being exploited. But there are a lot of businesses that will not hire somebody under 18 due to the restrictions that are there. Or if they are hiring somebody under 18, it's definitely in a minimal capacity, and there's probably not a lot of opportunities for somebody under 18 as there is somebody 18 or older. So there's an example of crew schedule. So now it's taken that master schedule and moved it and actually put people's names in as far as what you're looking at for the week. So it's taken that master schedule from each day and said, okay, here is schedules for everybody for the week, how many hours they've got. And then you got those total waged hours at the very bottom, seeing how you are compared to what the average weekly is. Some things to think about. First off, overtime. If you are an hourly employee and you work over 40 hours, you are paid at 1.5 times that rate. You get time and a half for that if you are an hourly employee. So that is something to, again, take into consideration is anybody that's over those 40 hours, they get paid time and a half. So if it's their last day that they're working and they've worked a little bit longer than they were supposed to, or they had to stay longer than they were scheduled to, and you're coming up on that last work day, you need to take that in consideration that, hey, they might go over that 40 hours. Are you able to absorb time and a half for that person, even if they're working just 1 hour over? That's more money than what that average rate is. Okay. Something else to look at, fair and reasonable schedules. I love this. Don't punish your best employees for being good at their job. Okay. Rotate who does the opening and who does the closing. Don't make it always the best employee that has to open or has to close. You need to rotate through that because then that person who is one of your superstars is like, man, I'm glad I do good at my job, but I feel like I'm being punished because I'm good at my job. Those that are not as good as I am don't have to do as much work. So, be conscientious about that and make sure you're trying to rotate as far as the schedules are concerned so everybody has that opportunity. Okay? Sometimes you might see instead of a finished time that you might see a schedule say, let's say 5 to close. And what that does, that prevents issues with employees leaving at the time set if something happens. So if you're a cook and it says from, you see 2 to 10 for Lenny down there on Sunday. Well, let's say somebody walks in at 9:50, right? If somebody walks in at 9:50, and of course you're going to serve them, if Lenny's like, well, hey, it's 10 o'clock, I'm done, and the entree order hasn't even come in yet, that's why I was always one that I would put, so and so to close, because then it just lets them know that, hey, you're here until we're done with stuff. If that's the case, be conscientious that you want to make sure that your schedule is under the maximum hours allocated for the week, just so you can take that into consideration if you have those late showing guests or there's some sort of unexpected thing that happens that makes sure staff have to stay later than they normally would, because in the end, we still want to make sure we're trying to be under those total hours that were scheduled. course, we've put the schedule together. Now we've got to distribute and then make any adjustments. Of course, the schedule, of course, would include the dates and the days of the week that's covered by it, the names of the employees, the days to work and the days that they're off, their start and stop times, and typically when it was prepared and the person who prepared it. So if there's questions, ideally they should be distributed 7 to 10 days before the date scheduled. We know realistically that usually doesn't happen. Usually it's the weekend before. So if it like this one's a Monday through Sunday, chances are in most cases that schedule probably went up Friday, the Friday before. But ideally, it'd be great to have them 7 to 10 days before they're scheduled. And the biggest reason for that is then your employees have plenty of time to make sure that that schedule jives. If they have any concerns, they can talk to whoever prepared it, and then they can also make appointments. They can do stuff set up so they know, hey, here's what I've got off this week, or here's when I got to be in, so then they can make adjustments for what needs to be done for other things outside of work. Of course, you want to make sure the schedule is posted, whether it's bulletin boards, it could be put in with their paychecks if they still get paper paychecks. In this day and age, you could email it to the employees. If there's an intranet system that they can access, there's different ways, but try to look at a few different ways of distributing and make sure you're consistent with it so the employees can rely on, hey, I can just go check my email every week and here's a schedule for what's going to look like 2 weeks from now or what have you. It's going to be, just part of life that you're going to probably need to make adjustments to that schedule. That's why having it 7 to 10 days out is nice, because then you've got time to make adjustments with it not being so under the wire as, oh, I need to get somebody for tomorrow, right? So try to always have a contingency plan, actions in the event of emergency or unexpected event, who can cover or how we can make adjustments to it. Talked a little bit about this, but cross training is a great thing because it does allow employees to be able to work in other positions if adjustments need to be made. If a prep cook also cross trains as a dishwasher, vice versa, your line cooks, I think, should all cross train as prep and dishwashers. So depending on what is needed, they're all there. It can be nice. You see shift leaders. So shift leaders are not necessarily chefs or sous chefs, but they are that next level down of employees that helps with training of new employees that can answer work-related questions and perform other functions as assigned by the manager. Usually, if they are assigned as a shift leader, they're paid a higher rate than they are as just a crew member. You see this a lot at QSR restaurants. QSR is those quick service restaurants. So like your McDonald's, Hardee's, places like that. You'll have a manager, assistant manager, and then you'll have shift leaders that are kind of like middle management, so to speak, within that quick service restaurant. Another thing you can look at is floaters. If you want to use the French term from 150, that's the aboyeur. Aboyeur is the swing cook or the swing chef. And that's somebody that is able to perform more than one duty. They can fill in wherever they're needed. Those is based upon cross training and stuff like that. A lot of times your floaters, you should pay a little bit more because I hate to say it, but they're more valuable because they can be put wherever they might need to be, depending on what the circumstances are. They've got additional training than what some of your other crew members have. So to have the aboyeurs, the floaters there can make a big difference. And it can make your life a little easier, especially when you have to make adjustments to your schedule. Finishing up, monitor employees during the shift. So one of the first things you should be doing at the beginning of every shift is a lineup meeting. It could be brief training. It's reinforcing goals and stuff. It's also giving updates about what's expected tonight, any specials, other areas of concern. So it's that pre-shift meeting to get everybody on the same page and up to speed about what's going on tonight. Oh, here's the food that we're out of. We've got a party of 12 coming at 7. Here are the specials. We'd like you to suggestively sell these items because we want to try to push them so that we don't have to worry about throwing them away in the next couple of days. Things like that is always a good thing. And then, just like we had talked about in a previous chapter, one of the best things you can do as the manager is the MBWA, manage by walking around, observing your employees, observing their habits, making sure that they are doing things according to company policy, according to what is written down as well. And then going back to previous chapters as far as any coaching, and hopefully not to the discipline part, but if it gets to that point, that as well. And then at the end, step 6 is looking for any variances between what the schedule was and the actual hours worked, also between scheduled and actual expenses. So you want to see, okay, did we meet our goals as far as how much money we took in? Based upon that, higher or lower, what's our labor look like? Were we lower than what we budgeted? Were we higher? Why were we higher? Why were we lower? Again, looking at the positives and negatives when it comes to the aspects of how that scheduling went that evening. So from there, you can then pull together a review where you can see where the setup is, how many hours were they scheduled, how many hours did they actually work, and then the variance. So you see in this example, for the week, they were scheduled to 732 total hours, but they end up using 763 total hours. So they use 31 more hours than before. But you can look with the servers, they used 10 more hours than they were supposed to, but the host used 5 hours less. 10 more for the bus people, 2 more for the dishwashers, 5 more for the bartenders, and 9 more for the cooks. So from there, you can then start looking and seeing, okay, why were there these variances? Why did we have more hours used than what hours were scheduled? And again, going back to looking at your income and, hey, does that additional 31 hours in labor, is that okay because we had more income coming in that offsets that extra 31 hours in labor? And if we didn't, why do we have that variance in that positive manner that we didn't want to have? So the other side to it is also the manager schedules. And the same basic principle applies as to how you would schedule your crew as well. But note, most managers are salaried. They're what they call exempt employees. So there are no specific number of hours worked. They don't get paid overtime if over 40 hours. However, be careful about the demands you place on your management. Don't place unreasonable demands. Yes, there are going to be some weeks where it's going to be a longer day. If it's Mother's Day week, yeah, you're probably going to be putting in a few more hours than you would on a normal week. But be careful about that. Now, again, the reason why most are in the salaried position is the fact that if you are a salaried manager in the restaurant industry, expect to work over 40 hours, right? Because if not, it makes more sense to keep you at an hourly rate than it is to make you at a salaried rate. So as a chef, as a front of the house manager, bar manager, et cetera, expect to have over 40 hours. But again, over 40 is not 80 hours, right? Right. So just, be conscientious about that. Another way to think about rotating is to have somebody on call. So if there is an emergency, somebody you need to call, it's not necessarily a bad idea to have, but please make sure if you're doing that, you rotate who is on call. So it's not always the same person that's on the hook for stuff. And ideally, at least one manager should be on duty whenever employees are working. And again, it doesn't have to necessarily be the same person each and every time. So you can see, in the setup here, you have the general manager, the assistant general manager, executive chef, culinary shift leader, maybe like the sous chef was probably the more correct term, dining room manager, bar manager, and then the service shift leader. Would be considered salaried positions when they're doing that. And then they have whatever their time is when they're off, when they're working, et cetera, et cetera. It all works very similar to each other when it comes to that stuff. Okay. So when you come to scheduling, I think a lot of us, when we first start doing scheduling, we just start randomly putting people into the schedule and, oh, this works, or, let's, go from here. Well, I think you find out your first month, or at least your first quarter, when numbers are not necessarily adding up, that, hey, I need to take a more scientific approach to it and be conscientious about, who I'm scheduling, when I'm scheduling, why I'm scheduling, making sure that I'm keeping under this budget. You'll see that the exercise for chapter 6 is all about this, and it does involve math, but refer back to your book, refer back to this lecture as far as this information, and utilize that information to work out those numbers so you have a better idea of how those things work. So when it comes time for you to actually start having to do a schedule, you have a bit of advantage in that you've done a little bit of this and you kind of have a better idea of what you should be looking at least to start off